What's happening, everybody? Nick here with the clubs and doing our little weekly check-in or almost weekly check-in. Tonight, what we're talking about is navigating the golf swing, right? So there is shitloads of information out there and available. Google, Google brings it to YouTube, on Instagram, Twitter, not as much. The two primary sources that you're most likely looking at are both IG and YouTube. There is an unbelievable amount of info. You want to get better, you want to do something, you want to look at your backswing, ball position, impact, release, whatever it is, you can find it, right? So, what we're talking about tonight is really how to navigate that. So, basically, um, I would say 90% of what you're looking at is probably not ideal, right? So there are some really fantastic coaches and instructors out there on YouTube, on IG. They have some really good things to, help you conceptualize a certain feeling, etc. So they are out there, but in general, it's much harder to find what's happening. It's much harder to find. So that is one thing that we're going to talk about today, and it's really how to find somebody good. So one thing that I'd highly advise you not to do is just go buy something like Golf Digest or like a mainstream golf media company that like rates coaches. Like they're obviously there, but from my perspective and my opinion, you have some of the coaches on, the hot list or the top 50 that are garbage. They're teaching really bad things or things that are designed to sort of be like a band-aid, but won't actually ever help you advance. And I also think, and something much more, worse about it is some of the action that is out there that's getting taught is, subjecting you to injury. So I'll just say from my own perspective, I've had a golf journey. I played since high school, and I was pretty good in high school. I had like a natural talent to do so, um, but I would say that my overall, bias was being more steep. So I played a fade. I always had distance, but it would be out of control. Like sometimes I'd be slicing the ball, like that was there. But I didn't really get a whole lot of instruction or lesson. Like I didn't really think about it like that at the time. I certainly, wish I did. But overall, I had that, and I think with more instruction, not that I wanted to, because as soon as I was done with high school, I wanted like a total break from golf. But and I took like an 8-year break almost. Played like a dozen times during that time frame, and then when post school I worked, and then 4 years went by or so, and then I had picked it back up because I had moved, and it was a tough pickup. I didn't have it. I was like more when I was in high school. I was like pretty skinny, and then I had gotten quite a bit more muscular through college and post college. So when you're more muscular, muscles tend to get in the way of making a good golf swing. So there are some things there. But even at that standpoint, like I didn't really think about the golf swing as like a deeply complex movement and into instruction, et cetera, et cetera. So fast forward, I run into a friend of a friend who's really good, and they end up, my friend's like, don't ask him, because I was what do you think? Sort of like somehow the conversation came up, and it was basically like, um, like take a video of my swing, and he's like, well, I think you should get more shallow, and that sort of set the motion to get momentum where it went from me attempting to get shallow, which basically made what I was doing worse. And just a cautionary tale for everybody. If you ask somebody an opinion, let's say not like if you're a mid double digit handicap and you're playing with a friend who is also a mid double digit handicap, like, 10 to 15, or there are 20. It's not to say that playing at that handicap is good or bad. Like, obviously, we always want to improve, but from an advice standpoint, the likelihood of whatever advice that person is going to give you is going to be beneficial to you is basically zero. Other than maybe like, hey, don't worry about like your shots. But if it's like swing mechanics, I would probably not do it. And at that point, too, like as far as being like as far as mental toughness, like golf competition, etc., you're still probably in a spot where if somebody says something to you, even though you're like, don't like ignore it, like you're still going to think about it a little bit, because as you also improve, like generally your mental, toughness, your mental development as far as being like a fortress in there also picks up as you improve. So like if somebody says something, you still might think about it, but like you're more ingrained in your swing or whatever, you're confident or whatever. So it's like not as big of a deal. But anyway, this is a person who was exponentially better than me. And it was like, do this. And it was part of it's like, this is what he thought was like really important, which to some degree it is. I think that being shallow in general is like way too on trend, because it's not just like, oh, you're shallow and like suddenly things improve. Like lots of things do improve in general, especially if you're coming from like over the top steep, you know. I'll just give you an example where I was coming in like this is really steep, this is not good, but going from here to there, here is still technically probably considered steep, but it's very functional where you can still play from this position. If we're talking about like shallow at the pro level, this is what we're talking about. But there's things that you need to be able to do when you get, the pitch of the shaft this flat. You need a stronger face, etc. You need to ensure that your rotation is matching it, all the rest. So anyway, it's like he tells me this and I go about it the exact wrong way. Now it worked, whatever I was doing, because I was not like into getting video and face-ons and like didn't understand like all the stuff that you need to do. And if you're watching this or you tune in later, like this is not to deter you from working on your swing. I'm just letting you know a little perspective, a little context about what I did and sort of the cautionary tale, which is generally, in short, doing it yourself often, if you don't have like a baseline foundation of information and understanding about your swing, about the golf swing, and like what you should or shouldn't do, and like what is important and the way to go about it, oftentimes you can go down a rabbit hole that might make yourself worse. And then the issue with that is you develop habits that you don't necessarily know that you're developing. And then if you want to, you say, okay, finally, I'm going to, work with somebody or like have somebody look at my swing that's going to be there because I want to, put in the effort. You'll have to undo the stuff that you did. And like, if you are an early roller, right? Well, if you early roll, and then generally the premise behind, like, let me get more flat, or somebody's like, oh yeah, like the club in, club head up, right? Which is, handle in, club head up, right? Well, if you're an early roller, you don't necessarily know that the feeling of this relative to this is massive. But if you don't know that, or somebody's not looking, or you're not looking down the line, like what can happen is you can actually get worse, even though you're thinking you're getting better, or you're like, oh yeah, this is right. And you're like, oh, that feels good. And like maybe you start hitting the ball better momentarily, or not necessarily worse, and then suddenly it goes away. So for my own cautionary tale, is that's what happened to me, where if I had not tried to do it myself and just gone to somebody, I had pretty good, like natural ability, like natural stuff that would probably have been easier to work with when it comes to just like, hey, you're steep and like we just need to do a couple things off the ball and it'll improve it quite a bit, rather than me ingraining really bad habits that I didn't have before, trying to pursue something. And then I ended up going, I'm just going to say his name because I think it's like really bad. And I think what he teaches is injury prone. So I came across, I'm like looking at Instagram and I never thought about the golf swing in the way that I did. And I'm like looking for swing stuff and all the rest. So I come across Mike Bender, and like he is rated in top 50 Golf Digest, right? Really, really good marketer, highlight marketer. So I start doing some things that he's doing. And part of his deal is like cranking it back and swinging out to the right? Well, just to let everybody know, when you crank this back, you're too buried. You can't re-square from here, right? And no pro does this. And then when you swing, you're sliding and throwing it out to the right. So you're dumping your trail side early. But the biggest thing about this is that's like tremendous stress on your back. So when you properly rotate, which is, I'm not really resisting here, but this is rotation without being buried. Somebody might be like, oh wow, his back. Well, the back issues come from the hip bump and tilting. Great example is Jason Day. Jason Day was like the tour, god of doing this and was really successful. And suddenly he has back issues. And then he spent the last, 2 or 3 years or longer working away from his original moves to save his back. So it's not just he wanted to do a swing rebuild for shits and giggles. He needed to because it hurt his back. So now he's actually rotating instead of sliding. And hold on, sorry. Whoops. He's actually rotating instead of sliding. And now, he can swing again, and his back is like much more protected. So that's the thing. So anyway, I went to Mike Bender and I'm like looking at his Instagram stuff, and I started to get better at first. And then finally I was like, all right, I'm going to get a lesson. A lesson was $100, which was like, okay, it's an online lesson. It took a few days to get back. And he sends me this trash video where it's like dusk out. I can barely see him. And it seems like I was the guy at the end of the day, because I think I had followed up. Like I hadn't heard anything. I sent him my video and I follow up and he's like, yeah, like basically get this bag and move the path over. There's like a few other drills. I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah, sounds good. So me, like now I'm starting to get into like trying to get better. So like I have questions. You're the expert. He's the expert. Like here's a few questions. Like, am I doing this right? Because I don't know. And that's the other thing is like, yeah, if you do something right and you don't understand if it's good or not, you could be working on feelings that you're going to ingrain, and suddenly like you're developing or building on things that aren't good. So anyway, they're like, yeah, if you want to answer the question, it's another $100. And I was like, fuck this. That's ridiculous. Right? Like, how can I not? I just paid you $100 for a garbage freaking video about swinging out to the right and like to buy his bag. If you're just to buy his bag. And I'm like, all right, no. So I move on, and like at this point, I was like really not playing well. And the problem with the bender, the bender piece, Mike Bender, is we all know we want a steep body and shallow arms. Well, Mike Bender's deal is flat body, way over crank, right? And then his deal, he does want you to keep the club outside, and he does like that, wall drill. But this is ridiculous. Like you can't swing from here. It can't happen. So anyway, Mike Bender. So that's like we moved on from then, and I was looking around. I saw another guy who I think was pretty good. I'm sure he's successful now. Like he had a much better understanding of his swing, but again, he was like 100 something bucks. I sent him my video, and I kind of got the same notion where it was like pull back as hard as you can, and like I was like more muscular. Like my chest was bigger, my arms were bigger. I'm not even trying to sound funny, but like for the golf swing, those are two muscle groups that are bad, right? Because like it limits your range of motion. So since that standpoint, it's been about I think 5 or 6 years. I have like slimmed down intentionally for golf. Hashtag marriage of the game. So he's like, yeah, like reach back, like, and I'm like, man, I can't. Like anyway, so I go through the same thing, answer a question. I was like, I'm just not feeling this. Like I don't know. So I ended up coming across and like searching around the internet, etc. And I'll wrap it up here soon. And I come across his name is Nick Tuason. He's awesome. And well, actually, first I came across Kelvin Miyahara, and he was a guy out of Hawaii. And he was so if you've come across anything that talks about the spine engine, micro movements, macro movements, rotation, I think that basically it came from him. He was filming Tiger Woods and the best pros and explaining the body biomechanics in how these micro movements were happening before anybody was. And I think he kind of got shredded for it because there were some other like mainstream coaches that were, doing what's on trend. And, he goes through and highlights, like, this is not just like speculation. He highlights some of like the main coaches like David Ledbetter. And it's like, this is crazy. He showed a video, like for anybody that doesn't know this, Michelle Wie, obviously she's very tall, very athletic. Michelle Wie, when she was like 13, was hitting it like 300 yards off the tee. And this was, a while ago, right? Absolute boss, like free flowing swing, etc. She goes on, Ledbetter gets a hold of her, and I think, it was Ledbetter, gets a hold of her, and instead of making like a free turn, they start doing the restriction model, right? Where it's like hold your legs, hold your pelvis, and like really reach against this. And in fact, there's a video of her recently that I saw that I'm like shocked about on Instagram, where she's like, yeah, if you want to rotate, go like this. I'm like, oh my God, like you are literally setting people up to get injured. This is like injury central doing this shit. I can't believe it. And she herself went through this. Like you went from like big, huge power swing, all natural, to like basically horrendous, injury prone, restrictive model. And now you're not even playing. Like it's nuts. So David Ledbetter got a hold of Duval. Duval, basically, other than having a flex wrist, is like today's example of the golf swing, which is strong face, slightly laid off, shallow coming down, ultra rotational. All the like lots of collegiate athletes, that's the move. So it's all kind of like the same look where it's up, you stop here and then you flex, the club drops in and you're just firing, right? There's not a lot of like down the line Tiger 97 stuff, which is fine. But like David Duval was like he in before 2000 when he won the Masters, like he was hitting 270 off the deck with 3-wood. And for anybody that doesn't know, that's before the ball blew up, like meaning the ball added so much distance and all the equipment. Like he's just like crazy speed even then, right? So, the mainstream coaches, they get a hold of these players, they do something on trend, they change what they're already doing, and they get ruined and they basically never recover. It's happened. Tiger Woods, great example, right? Like, look at the coaches that he's gone through, and one in particular, there's another guy, like, look at Justin Rose. Justin Rose was like a monster iron player. Like, that was his deal. The guy wins the 2013 FedEx Cup, changes irons, et cetera, starts doing, like, really ridiculous moves, and falls off the face of the earth unless he's, like, having a good putting day. So anyway, that was like super long-winded. Apologies about that. My cautionary tale is basically, if you do it yourself, I would just suggest there's probably a really good way to do it yourself. If you don't necessarily want to seek paid for advice and you just want to watch YouTube videos or IG videos. So really, even though something could be very much on trend, in my opinion, in the way that you should really go about building a golf swing or even improving, you want to get better, you want to reach your next level. First, I just put out a video today about posture, ball position. Like, you got to have the foundation. But let's say you have that down. What's next? It's going to be, in my opinion, backswing. Well, takeaway. First 3 feet of your swing sets you up for how you're going to swing the ball. If you get the first 3 feet right, the amount of compensations that you'll need to do after that are a whole lot less than if you do something weird or, not right off the ball. Basically, you start making compensations. So just logical sense says if you make compensations early, the likelihood of you correcting and not having to make more compensations is pretty low, meaning that you will have to do that. So just as an example, if you early roll off the ball, but somehow you land, in a position like this, even though you land in a position like this, the likelihood that you're going to have to make some sort of compensation is still there. A great example, is Robert Garrigus. Early roll off the ball, great position at the top, unbelievable transition, super powerful guy. But just remember, like, that's Robert Garrigus, that's a pro. So we don't necessarily want to follow things that aren't really optimal if we're trying to get better and we're not, practicing or hitting a bunch of balls or doing things on a daily basis. I also think that there's a correlation to the guys that are most successful on tour and swing. If you have really unorthodox swings that they're like basically making working, usually it might be another aspect of their game that isn't ball striking that's making them, be as successful. But for the most part, they're not really consistently successful. So if you look at the guys who are, at the top of the leaderboard now, their swings are ridiculous. You're not really seeing a whole lot of and there is the piece of, well, yeah, like they get there in a different way and then they get to the top and then they get to the bottom and like they all look the same. Like, yeah, that's fair. But just remember, like, this is a specific pro and very, 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 very few people are doing that. So, I guess it sounds potentially harsh and it's not like don't do you or don't do what you're doing, but just keep in mind that the more unorthodox that you're coming off the ball and moving up, the more unorthodox that you're going to have to do to try to get into a consistent position, because ideally we want to be consistent. So circling back to the topic of this conversation, which is navigating, I would say a couple of things to look for, right? And one, when you're building, foundation. 2, takeaway, backswing. 3, topswing, transition. 4, downswing, impact, release. If you focus on elements out of that order, that's okay, especially if you get stuck in one of the earlier elements, because what can happen is if you think about, well, I want to be here, maybe that helps you, get better here, right? But the idea is to go in that order, because the next idea and the reason why is the better this movement is up here, the less you have to do when it comes down. So it happens more naturally. Very, fewer and fewer compensations, the better this part gets, right? Obviously, you'll have to do some things, but the better that you land in the spot, that's why the top players, when they're getting and transitioning, especially if they're, taking it back in their most consistent way, and they're not doing a lot of like weird or very unorthodox things, then they can rely on that under pressure. So maybe you're not a tournament golfer, maybe you're just playing, but like even your tournament is like, hey, you want to shoot a good score. If you're out there and you're not like, and you're carrying even a little bit, then that's going to put pressure on you. So if we can rely on, the better we can rely on ball striking, because not all putts are going to go in. Not all chips are going to get, we're going to get our chips. We can always get our chips pretty close, but not all putts are going to drop, right? We're just going to have bad days, like even if we're putting it really well. But our ball striking is not always going to be good. We're going to have off days, but if we can get the dispersion, tighter, that's the idea. So we have our order. The second piece is, what do I look for? Who am I looking like? How do I know if something's good or bad? So one, I certainly wouldn't base it solely off a Golf Digest, like top 50, like, well, they're top 50, like they must be good. We highlighted some examples early. For example, Mike Bender, he's a top 50 guy. I think like his advice, injury prone, like I wouldn't go in that direction. Then, if you're looking at YouTube or Instagram, YouTube, for example, there's lots of good coaches out there. I would look for things where, you can, it depending on how you learn, right? Like sometimes people are very visual. Sometimes they can like grasp more complex things. I always thought at first, like, and a lot of coaches think this, and I think it has to do with who is potentially consuming that instruction, where it's, the answer is if you're hitting a slice, all you have to do is, strengthen your grip, or all you have to do is aim more to the right or swing out to the right. If you're getting something like that and you don't like, you just want a quick fix and you're just trying to get better, like that's fine. But I think ultimately it will most likely just waste more of your time, because it's just a quick fix and eventually your problems are going to come back. So if you're looking at somebody, obviously I'm going to say we have really good stuff. Now we're more complex. We're more swing mechanics. We're more overall build rather than, so to speak, a Band-Aid. That's the way I view the swing. It doesn't mean that like you have to do some sort of like crazy swing grind and whatever. Like I've been swing grinding for 5 years, and I'm like, the past couple of years, last year in particular, like I finally hit it. And it doesn't necessarily take long. Like I did it online. I learned my own thing. Like I gained so much knowledge within the swing, etc. That's not something that anybody needs to do, or I'm not suggesting it. I'm like obsessive and, it like really, really into it. But if you're just trying to get better or whatever, like I still wouldn't necessarily go the quick fix route, because it's going to inevitably waste your time. Like having a bit more fundamentals are going to do a few things for you. You're going to get more consistent, and the consistency is going to last. And then you can build on that consistency. So let's say you get to a certain point. Well, okay, you can continue to build on that. But if you don't have anything to build off of, it's going to be hard to improve long term. So back to, how to search, what to look for. I would browse videos. about the person's feed, right? See how they talk, see what the instructions like, and also determine some are very entertainment focused, where, or, I don't know if it's the right term, like kitschy or whatever, but like some is very just like visually appealing so that you want to watch it. And then because you want to watch it and because it's fun or whatever, it's like, yeah, hey, this is great. Like, let me try this. Now, I'll say we've upped our editing game here to make it more visually appealing, but the information hasn't changed. The information is very good, but less about us and more. That's certainly something I would look for. I would look at some of the library too, where, if you're going through, take a look at backswing, take a look at takeaway, take a look at, see how like granular things are going to get, take a look at the explanation. Now, this is biased and it's subjective, certainly, but I view the golf swing, actually, I shouldn't say that. The golf swing is a complex movement. And the saying where it's like, if you can play, you can't coach, and vice versa, it makes sense, because if you're born with, insane golf skills, you're born with them, so you don't understand how you got there. You just kind of had it. I'm not saying that people didn't grind for that, but they are not necessarily conceptualizing or like understanding, little feelings or micro movements within the golf swing. So I would also look for that, because little things. So just for example, if you go to a YouTube video that's really successful and they're like, yeah, so basically, if you slice the ball, here's your simple fix. This is all you need to do. You just take your grip and move it over. So I view that as really, really bad advice. The reason why is, and what they're not explaining, and this is what would make me determine, like, this is not a person that I would want to go to for quick fix, like just trying to get better, I don't really care, like a simple solution or like an easy solution. When you change your grip, it changes how you take away the club right off the ball. So when you make your grip more strong, you're more prone to early roll, because that's the way that your wrist dynamics work. But if you're just simply changing something, you don't necessarily know that, right? Or if it's like, if you want to hit up on the ball, here's what you need to do. This is all you need to do. Just hip bump and lean back. It's like, also common, ludicrous, right? It's a ludicrous thing, because when you do that, right, what do? You're tilting back. Most likely, if somebody is looking at how to hit up on the ball, they might early extend. Early extension means that their trail side dumps early. So you might hit it fat, you might hit it like all in which directions. You don't have a nice long trail side, right? So we look at pros and they look like this through the ball, right? So circling back to the hitting up on the driver, when you hip bump and turn back like this, and if you are prone to early extension, what's going to happen? One, you're going to over crank back, early roll, and then you're going to be forced to swing out to the right, and you're going to dump early. So these are the things that I'm talking about, like on the quick fix stuff, where it's like, it like might make sense at the time, but in practice, especially if you don't know what this stuff can end up leading you to do, then it really doesn't work, which is why I would say, like, looking at somebody who might explain that, or provide more context onto why you would want to do that, would make sense. The other pieces too are, how do they go about doing certain things? I'm trying to think. I mean, I've seen some stuff that's really good out there. I mean, I obviously think what we have is, of course, better than anybody else's, but that's biased. But that's really what it is. Like, take a look before you jump right in, and before it's solely just, hey, the content is very entertaining and is very visually appealing. does that, mean that it's actually good advice? So same thing, right? I've seen a common thing. Well, it's like, how do we fix early extension? Do you want to hit the ball? Do you want to hit the ball solid every single time? This is all you need to do, right? So you'll see, leg shift, right? And you get your body ahead of the ball. It's like you might hit the ball first every time, but you're going to hit a poor strike if you do that, right? If you look at the most rotational players, right? One circling back, this is not a natural body movement, right? This is a slide. Okay, slide is prone to injury, and slide also makes you what? Fall back, tilt back, dump early, right? If you look at the most rotational players in the game, let's just take Dustin Johnson, for example. Do you see Dustin Johnson going like this? No, you absolutely do not see him doing that. So, in relation to finding a coach, Dustin Johnson's move in general is not something repeatable. Most people are not going to be able to do what he can do, right? Especially if you're, trying to, improve your game. That's like not something that we necessarily want to copy. But if we're looking at a coach or an instructor or content online that we're saying like, I want to work on my release, it's got to match up to some degree based on the best players in the game, right? So you might not have a good understanding of like what the micro movements are, but if you have somebody that's really visually entertaining and they have a ton of subscribers and et cetera, so the question would be, are they really good marketers? Probably. And two, just because they have a lot of subscribers or what they're doing, people seem to like, is it because of the entertainment factor or is it because it's good instruction? And then three, if they're telling you, let's say, releasing, right? And this is the solution to hitting the ball more solidly, right? Early load on your lead side and then jump, right? All of which is bad. But if you see somebody saying that, I might just go to, let's say, Rory McIlroy or a Dustin and say, okay, are the best players in the world, are they doing these moves? Because the best players in the world, even though their moves are basically unrepeatable by anybody else, they're still absolutely solid fundamentals, which are rotation and how their body moves. So that's something that I would also base it off of, where it's not like, hey, we're going to try to be the best players in the world, but we want to copy some of these micro and macro movements. So way early on in our conversation, sorry, I'm rambling here a little bit, but we talked about Kelvin Miyahara, and that's like he had a stroke, unfortunately, so he wasn't taking on lessons. So I had found my way to my guy who I've been working with, who's amazing, who was very like, look, I'm a swing builder. I view the swing as complex. So when we talk about, movements, we're talking about having, internal rotation, external rotation, abducted, inducted, PPT, APT, like those terms. Like at first you're like, whoa, holy shit, that's a lot. Like that's super complex. But the body and the golf swing are complex. So if you can get over the barrier and learn things, it actually might become more clear, because if somebody tells you swing out to the right, make a fuller turn, you don't exactly know what that means. You just like your intuition, which is probably wrong. You're going to go, okay, I'm going to make a big turn. Oh, I made a big turn, right? So you're like, hey, I'm successful. I made this big turn. Well, it's like you don't know all the micro movements that go along with making the big turn and how to make the big turn. So I think it ends up being more confusing. So, we're circling back to content and looking, if you have somebody that is explaining something to you in very basic, uh, basic B terms, it could work. But if you're, and I guess it also depends on the type of instruction that you're looking for. Where, like I said, like if it's I'm just looking for something quick and easy, and I just want to like hit the ball a little bit better. I just want to get the ball like off the ground. Okay, fine. If it's, what, like I've golfed more, I've picked up golf, like I would like to get better. Maybe it's not tournaments, but like I don't want to duff it, 20 times around. Like I really want to like shoot a score. Like I enjoy it, but I'm getting frustrated. I'd like to take it a little bit more seriously, then that escalates it. And I would say too, you have an opportunity where it's kind of like forest through the trees, where it's taking a big picture approach. Like you can focus on the tree and go, okay, well, sure. You know what? If I strengthen my grip, I just won't slice it. Right. But does not slicing it mean you're hitting it better? No, it just means that you're not slicing it. Right. So you can look at the tree, or you can look at the forest and be like, look, this might take a touch longer, but I'm actually going to find more enjoyment. And even though the barrier to entry or the learning curve on associating the golf swing is something more complex, rather than just like, yeah, swing it to the right, like strengthen your left hand, strengthen your lead hand, whatever that is, even though it's a little bit harder at first, overall, you will actually be much better off for it, because we're not actually leaving something to any subjectivity. Meaning, okay, all I want you to do, I want you to make the biggest turn back that you can, right? So that's like super subjective, other than all I need to do is feel like I'm making a big turn. Is this a big turn? Is this a big turn? Now, if you naturally would go like this, hey, great. But most people, it's like a big turn. So now you're too flat, you're too cranked, but we still hit our big turn, versus if we describe it and go, don't roll your shoulder, you need, internal rotation in your trail arm, et cetera, like describing your knees, like how your pelvis and sacrum and like certain body parts of body dynamics, how those sit and hit. If you think about it that way, even though at first you're like, fuck, that's a lot of terms that I may or may not know, it might take a little extra time. Ultimately, now there's no subjectivity, because we know exactly what we need to do, right? It just takes a little extra time to understand that. So again, I'm sorry for jumbling, but getting back to basically the coaches and how to navigate is, I think probably part of it is there's not that many people that necessarily want to take that approach, especially if they're like browsing non-paid for content. But even if you do, I would look for, more complex people who seem to have a better understanding of the golf swing on a deeper level, and aren't trying to like sell you a quick fix. So you watch their content. Yeah, if you're looking at something for entertainment, like sure, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about like somebody is saying that they are offering golf instruction, and they're trying to give you some like easy example that's not necessarily like, hey, about chipping, like, hey, if you want to chip better, lift your hands upright and boom, you're like a pro. Like if that's a little bit easier, I'm talking about more swing mechanics and ball striking and the overall golf swing. So yeah, I don't think that, I'm sorry, I think I jumbled around quite a bit. So I'm going to try to wrap it up. Basically, to start, as far as the golf swing, posture, ball position, lead, side, neckline. Posture, you can look it up. You can find somebody. We also have a great posture video on how to get there. Posture, so that's your foundation. You got to get those two elements right, or else you're always going to make compensations. Just as an example, if the ball's too far back, you might be more prone to release or dump early. If it's too far forward, it is more prone to go right, but at the same time, you do have more time to get there. So that's your foundation. And then really, if you're looking to get better, the elements, depending on where you are, but I would just always say, start with the early parts, which is, hey, I'm a 15 handicap. How do I get better? Well, let me look at my posture and ball position. Are those good? Okay, check. That's easy. The next step. Well, is my takeaway good? No, I inside rolls. Like that would be your first place to start. Because if you go immediately to release an impact, you're limiting how much progress you can make because you haven't gotten the first element of the swing, in a better position. Doesn't have to be perfect, but it should be in a better position. So you go through each section of the swing that I define as takeaway, right? So takeaway, backswing, right? I should go up here. This is the top swing. You want to make sure that you have a correct looking position, right? Transition, downswing, impact. And those are the four elements, or not four, way more than four. Those are the elements of the golf swing that I define on certain pieces what you should look at. But I would go in order of that. And then if you get stuck on, let's say, the takeaway or the backswing, okay, fine. Now let's think about impact, right? But first, let's try these things. We have to grind a little bit on these things if you want results, right? And quite frankly, you can make big results if you get that right. And then also, if you're a person who's either just starting out or has been playing or kind of here or there, and now you're picking up a little bit, you actually have an opportunity to build some really, really awesome fundamentals. So if you do it right the first time, even though it might be a little harder, you'll probably be better off. You'll probably be a little happier, and then you'll play more consistent golf. You'll build your consistency, and you'll build a solid foundation that you can, move up. You raise your ceiling. But if you don't get some of the other things right, the ceiling is probably a little bit lower because certain elements are just not going to be there. So it's going to be hard to improve upon. With the coaches and who to look for, I'm assuming that you are trying to get better and you're not just like, hey, I haven't played in a year. I don't want to duff the ball. Like, let me go look at some content. So I'm assuming that that's not you. I'm assuming that you want to get better. You're trying to reach the next level. When you're looking on the certain elements, whether or not it's us or somebody else, I would highly recommend looking at, instructors that are going to be a bit more complex. It's not a quick fix. The golf swing, the way the body moves, they're all complex micro movements, and you want somebody who will be able to explain those to you. Now, the learning curve on understanding the explanation might be a little steep at first, but once you do, it actually leaves less to subjectiveness because you know exactly what you need to do versus broad statements of, say, oh, I'm a slicer, let's change your path to make it more out to the right. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to swing out to the right, right? Swinging out to the right could be swinging out to the right, swinging out to the right. There's lots of subjectivity. Or I want you to make as big a back turn and back swing as you can. Okay, I made it as big as I can, but I don't know that I need to actually get steep shoulders, right? I don't know like the specific positions that I need to get in. And in order to get to those specific positions, like the body parts are in certain positions. When your shoulder is internally rotated versus externally rotated, right? And like, how does that look? How does that feel? Well, if you're internally rotated up here, your range of motion is pretty limited. But if you're externally rotated, you can go a lot further back, So like, that's what I would look at too when you're, because if you think about it, like you might first watch this and go like, what the fuck does that mean? What are you talking about? This is stupid. Like, I'm going to move on. But at the same time, what I just said, once you literally Google external shoulder rotation, internal shoulder rotation. After you understand that, which is literally however many words that is, you type in and you're like, oh, you see a picture that Google pulls up. You look at it and go, oh, okay, I know what that means now. Well, now I've left zero to chance in what I mean, right? You know exactly what I'm saying. Versus, yeah, swing all the way back. You could land in either position. So I would, if you're seeking instruction, that's what I would look for too, is somebody who's able to explain those things and look at it more complex, especially if you're looking to advance and get to the next level, not just, quick fix. Also, generally speaking, there's no quick fix other than potentially an address or a posture position change or a ball position change, which can do a lot for ball striking and how your swing works. It's like an instant fix. Especially if you are not in a good position, you can really change things quite a bit pretty quickly. But other than that, the other things, stuff that's really like kitschy, entertaining, what's like, hey, here's all you need to do. You want to fix that slice? Well, this. It's like, it could be part of that, but I would take caution in seeing some of that stuff because a lot of it is entertainment. A lot of it is just like, let's throw something against the wall that somebody might want to do or try. Like maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. But it's probably instruction that is not really ideal long term. So anyway, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for listening to me ramble. If you tune into the after this, certainly drop a comment. Really appreciate it. And keep the grind up. Have a great night.